Great budget for education. Happy to take your questions.
Money for truancy services when there are 60,000 chronically...
There is money for truancy services that's listed under attendance service.
And what's the boost, can you tell me?
It's about another 7,500 places. I'll give you the exact numbers if you like. We have... The extra funding going in is $20 million over the 5-year period, and that funds an extra 7,500 places.
The Holidays Act, that must have been quite a nasty surprise when you heard that you'd be on the hook for $200 and something million.
No, we've known that's coming for a while. It's taken a while to work through. It's still not completely worked through yet. This is not unique to education, though, and so I would say that whilst people might sort of say, oh, it's Nova Pay, yes, the payroll system is part of it, but the complexity of the Holidays Act and Holidays Act liability is not unique to education. It's something that many, many employers have been grappling with.
Do you know what sort of like the per capita screw-up cost of this appropriation is versus, I know it was a massive cause for the DHB blowout,
yes.
And I think
my understanding is on a per-person basis, the variation is huge. And so, you know, some people it could be a more significant amount, other people it would be next to nothing.
Jennifer Collins today was saying in a speech that teachers and the like will be heading over to Australia as a result of this budget. What do you make of comments like that?
Oh, look, I didn't pay a lot of attention to the speech. To be honest, it was difficult to follow. But I just think it's an unvalid criticism. In fact, we've injected a significant amount of money into our teaching workforce over the last 4 years, over the last 4 budgets, and this year's budget continues to do that.
Some of the increases, like ECE, health spending, there are increases, but they are lower than the inflation rate, meaning that there's going to be cost pressures on those departments. And a few weeks ago, you did, put out a message about wage restraint to them. Does that mean it's going to be a tough year for the civil service with both their managers and their paychecks, saying you have to do more with less?
So if you take vote education, we have built in inflationary or cost pressure adjustments every year that we have been in government. And whilst, you might end up under or over in any given year by a 0.1% or whatever, across the cycle, we've been ahead ultimately of the overall rate of inflation. So, you're forecasting ultimately, and so our cost increases are based on Treasury's most up-to-date forecasts at the time the budget gets locked in. And if they end up under or over, then that ultimately has a bearing, potentially on what they get the following year in terms of the cost pressure increase. It's not something the last government did, so they didn't do those universal across-the-board cost pressure increases, ECE, schooling, tertiary education, which we have done, so they don't go further backwards. But in some cases, there's still a need to go further forward. And you'll see that in vocational education, for example, where we've put a very big boost in this year. What that does is recognise that since about 2010, the gap between vocational education and other forms of post-school education has increased quite significantly because they haven't had those cost adjustments. Across the public sector, ultimately that comes down to a combination of factors. Government departments get additional funding for government. How they allocate that funding really comes down to a whole lot of internal decisions that get made by chief executives.
We had today a story in Northland of teachers having to teach kids in hallways. We've got rotting classrooms and major infrastructure problems. What is this budget going to do to address that?
There's a big investment, again, in school capital funding. So across all 4 of the budgets that I've been the Minister of Education, we've put big investments into school capital. There's 2 main strands of funding for school capital. One is the funding that we put in through depreciation, so reinvesting depreciation funding into school upgrade programs. And then the other big chunk of money is expanding the school portfolio, so building new classrooms for additional kids. We've also put more money in this year's budget to boost the depreciation side of things, so recognising that the depreciation spend, whilst it's significant, isn't enough, and some schools are in a worse condition than can be dealt with through depreciation. We are going through a process of prioritisation, though, and there are some schools that are in very, very bad shape, so they make it to the top, and often they require significant rebuild work. other schools, we can do things to kind of keep them going until such time as they make it to the top of the list for the rebuilds.
Did you request money for a dedicated COVID-19 quarantine facility?
Not in this budget, but we are looking at what the long-term future options might be around that. At the moment, we've got funding and we've got arrangements in place that take us well into next year. Beyond that, I think there's two things we need to look at. One is whether we're going to need to continue to have some provision for that in response to COVID-19. The other is whether we think there should be some provision set aside as a future contingency. The latter question involves considering what those facilities might otherwise be used for when they're not being used as quarantine facilities. So we're in those discussions at the moment. And it's likely that the private sector will continue to be involved in that conversation.
There's a possibility that a request will come in the next budget for that.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Make of the Treasury's prediction of significantly more open borders from the 1st of January next year. What's your interpretation of what that means?
Look, everybody's crystal ball gazing around that. Vaccination will play a role here. I think I've always said at this podium that the opening of the borders is going to be a progressive process, not just a sudden big bang. And I think we're already seeing some of that now. Australia, the Pacific, there's movement. But I think it will be a wee while before we see all restrictions coming off.
Treasury also said that there's a significant risk of large public sector pay claims in the future. I mean, is that sort of them calling a vote of no confidence on your call to show wage restraint across the state sector?
No, I think that it's just them flagging up that expectations are high, and I think we talked about that when we announced the pay guidance that we issued.
More breathing room with the COVID fund, that $5 billion left there. I mean, a big outbreak and another huge wage subsidy need might deplete that very quickly.
Look, we'll cross that bridge if we get to it.
Are you? Would you like to have seen in the sequencing framework Māori 50 and over and Pacifica 50 and over included with the Group 3 65 and over group, as recommended by the immunisation group?
If I'm going to be really frank with you, I'd prefer that there wasn't a sequencing framework at all. I'd prefer that we could just get on with it and vaccinate everybody. The reality is, with limited supply in the first half of the year, you have to draw lines somewhere. And the ultimate line that we drew was really around the most at-risk people. So border workers, those in frontline health roles, and so on. So, if we could have had millions of doses of the vaccine arriving earlier in the year, then we wouldn't have had to have these conversations at all.
There's clearly a line there for those at-risk people, some 160,000 odd Māori and Pacifica between 50 and 64, and they are that recommendation was not picked up.
Look, I think wherever you drew the line, there was going to be a case to be made that you could have drawn the line somewhere else. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.